Got your sound on?
Loud and clear.
All right. Good morning. Blessings to everybody as we gather and continue on in Ezekiel. We're going to be picking up where we stopped last week with Ezekiel 16:15 through 22. We did kind of cover it towards the end, but I fear we hit that so lightning quick last week. We better go ahead and do a little bit of refresher and repeat. So, all right. So 16:15 through 22. I guess I don't have to ask who's going to read.
Well, technically there's two of us. We'll alternate.
I'll start. But you trusted in your beauty and plagued the poor because of your renown lavished your whoring on with any passerby. Your beauty became his. You took some of your garments and made for yourself colorful shrines, and on them plagued the whore. The likes have never been nor ever shall be. You also took your beautiful jewels of my gold and of my silver, which I had given you, and made for yourself images of men, and with them plagued the whore. And you took your embroidered garments to cover them, and set my oil and my incense before them. Also my bread that I gave you, I fed you with fine flour and oil and honey. You set before them for a pleasing aroma, and so it was, declares the Lord God. And you took your sons and your daughters, whom you had borne to me, and these you sacrificed to them to be devoured. Were you whoring so small a matter that you slaughtered my children and delivered them up as an offering by fire to them? And in all your abominations and your whoring, you did not remember the days of your youth, when you were naked and bare, wallowing in your blood.
Okay. So part of the reason I did want to jump back into this passage was I wanted to highlight how the nature of evil, where people talk about sometimes the nature of evil is the absence of good. That's not really quite true. The nature of evil is that it twists what is good. It's a distortion. It's a disordered version of what is good.
I mean, I do think the general image of evil as the absence of good isn't a bad thing because it's making good primary. It doesn't let evil be its own thing. You're just another way of showing about how evil is only a parasite and it's not its own thing.
Well, the primary reason
it can't exist without good. Evil cannot exist without good. Good can exist without evil.
Which is true. But the reason I want to point that out is because this is part of the insidiousness of evil.
To take something that is good and twist it around and
yeah, and it makes it more subtle of a trap. And so to take the goods that are going on here, you have the goods of God lavishing the people with what we would call the first article gifts. So this is food, clothing, house and home, spouse and children, and all these things.
Land animals.
Yeah, land animals. Right? So these things are all good. And then they're being distorted into something evil, where they're being worshipped, where they're being sought after, where people are killing each other for them, and even to the point of taking their children, particularly their sons, who would have had to have been redeemed at the temple because they belonged to the Lord, and then sacrificing them to golden idols.
At this point, were they even reliably redeeming their firstborns in the temple anyway?
Probably not. Chances are good they weren't being good about that. But I won't rule it out because we are well familiar with the way people will go through the motions, because that's what good people are supposed to do, and then just go do something completely else the rest of the time.
I suppose it depends how wealthy they were. Because in the sense of, boy, I could really use that lamb for something else.
Yeah. But but this is what so often happens: is God gives us something good, and then it is distorted.
Well, it's also a matter of, it's been pointed out, right, Satan can't create. He has to make use of what God created because he can't make his own stuff.
You stole my line.
Well, it's worth saying.
But it's nice to know that people are paying attention.
Well, that's why I generally do like the evil as just being, right, the absence in the sense of, right, it's a parasite. It can't exist on its own. As opposed to, it's not this big dualistic thing that you have to, can't do without. You can do without. If only we could, There's nothing about the world that means it has to be there.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a very common thing I see, the assumption that, you have to, like the whole dark and light, yin and yang, bringing in, the idea that, it's got its good side, evil does. You have to have it,
I have seen that people who would say, well, you have to have evil so that you know what good is.
And we're like, no.
I think I could live without evil just fine.
Have you experienced, how old am I now?
You're 47.
47, thank you. 47 years of evil in this world. I can honestly say I can do without some evil now.
Well, it's also a matter of being able to imagine it. Because the ending of your Wheel of Time series, when they're imagining what the world would be like without evil, they couldn't do it. They decided a world without evil was like just a world of everybody was automatons. Because what is with the world if we can't choose? So he had a chance to create the world exactly as he wanted it, and he decided a world that had no evil was not a world worth living in.
Yeah, and that does show our lack of ability to imagine perfection.
He must have never had faced any true evil.
Well, it's just we can't really. We've never experienced a world without evil. But yeah, a lot of people in the West kind of consider that you can't have it, and maybe also that you shouldn't have it, even.
I'm down with that, but pure good.
Yeah.
I was thinking sometimes I feel like I can speculate a whole lot and I can understand why people think all these random things. And my sister is like, that's just stupid. And sometimes I'm like, you know what, just being nicely rooted in reality, that no, none of these things call you. You can't imagine how these stupidities work. It's just stupid. Sometimes I think there's a lot to be able to just say that. I don't get why people want to do evil like that. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could do without evil or the temptation of evil, and what's wrong with it?
Yeah. And the other part that I really wanted to focus on here is the intimate nature of idolatry and adultery. The relationship of marriage and then that kind of close relationship that is involved with our understanding of God's relationship with his people is a significant image. And so when we begin to chase after others, it's other people. It is very similar to us chasing after other gods. And this is a picture. The marriage adultery picture is very common among all of the prophets and even into the apostles' writings, where Paul picks up in it in terms of calling the church the bride of Christ. And he even picks up on it in the marriage relationship between a Christian husband and a Christian wife, where their relationship mirrors, in certain aspects, mirror how Christ operates with his church. And Ezekiel is doing something similar here, except he's looking at it in the brokenness of the relationship and emphasizing the breaking of it. Another a great example of this is Prophet Hosea, whose life itself becomes an object lesson in this, where he's to marry this lady who was a prostitute, and she continued her prostituting ways after marriage. And God then uses that as an illustration of how Israel has been. And in the end, there is redemption. So it's which illustrates that even this can be redeemed or forgiven. Excuse me. And so people, and I bring this up because part of the reason I bring this up is because people, y'all are always focusing in on sex. Well, it's because it's so closely related to the nature of idolatry. And the two sins have been very closely linked. And so we have here, Ezekiel is highlighting now how the bride has misused all the gifts and her beauty that she was given to spite the one who had redeemed her.
They returned evil for good.
Yeah, she returns evil for good. What we have here is a little bit of the mirror image, reverse image of what we witness in Ruth. If you recall that the story, the account of Ruth, King David's grandmother, great-grandmother?
Great, I think.
Yeah, great-grandmother. She comes back with her mother-in-law, and they're living in poverty, and because, well, mother-in-law lost her husband, Ruth lost her husband, they didn't have a whole lot to their name. And then you have Boaz, who acts as the kinsman redeemer and redeems her from her debt and marries her. And the kinsman redeemer is something of a figure of Christ, and that he relieves the person of their debt so that they may once again be free and a part of the people. So this is all going to play together. And it's so typical that the people take what had been given as a good gift and they use it as a confirmation for how they're living. And if there's one thing that there's many things that are consistent, but this is one of those consistent things among people, is they take the blessings of their life as confirmations for the goodness of their life.
And the lack of, and sufferings as God, hates me.
Yeah, and then suffering as God is God hating me. And so they're looking, oh, we've got the good life. We got lots of money, we've got lots of food, the vineyards are fruitful, trade is good, life is good. Therefore, God must be happy with how we're living. That is not true. As God makes clear in other places, He makes it rain even on the wicked. So you can't look at your material blessings and say that God is approving of you.
I guess it's probably all for our benefit that God blesses us even when He does not, in fact, approve of us.
Yeah. Um, I mean, it is true that God has in places and done things like send famines and the like to call people to repentance. But that does not necessarily mean that the lack of such a thing doesn't means that he's approving of what's going on.
I was thinking of Jesus with the temple of Siloam falling. Were they worse sinners than you?
Yeah, Jesus with the temple of Siloam, where the guys whose blood was spilled with their sacrifices. Either of those.
Yeah.
Were they less sinful than you? And the answer is no.
I like that one. They took his forgiveness as a license to continue to sin. I see that a lot today.
I was thinking Paul warned against it. Should I there sin all the more so that grace may increase? By no means.
And really that is a stronger phrase. He doesn't use coarse language, but it has a much stronger meaning than people tend to give it credit for, because it doesn't have coarse language. When Paul writes that, no, we should not sin all the more so that grace may abound, he is like, in absolutely no sense of the word, in any possibility of any time period or anything ever considered this an idea that's right, because it's absolutely wrong.
I was thinking he was saying, I think what he was saying, that he was talking about that our enemies accuse us of that, and inasmuch as we do that, they are right to do so. That would be a wrong way, a very wrong way.
Yeah. Because and then he resolves the point as, look, you died to sin. You cannot go back to sin. You're dead to it. You are alive in Christ. You were once a slave to sin. Now you are a slave to Christ. You live for your master. But yeah, took forgiveness as license to continue to sin. Oh yeah, I hear that one all the time. Well, Jesus has to forgive me. No, he doesn't. In fact, he actually said he won't. That there is things for which one will not be forgiven. So don't take that lightly. And
some people say, well, all I have to do is pray for forgiveness. I can continue doing and living this lifestyle, and all I have to do is every night or in the morning pray for forgiveness for.
On the one hand, the real danger there is that the longer you're living in sin, the less likely you're going to want to look to forgiveness.
Yeah. And also, when people are saying that, I was like, yeah, you haven't read the Bible, have you? Because Paul, in his letters, really makes that clear.
Well, some of them had read the Bible, but they didn't understand.
Oh, yeah.
What they were reading.
Yeah. Is one of the things that you can witness in Paul's letters is you'll see him talk very magnificently about justification, God making us righteous. And then he spends a great deal of his letters of, okay, so how now shall you live? 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians to a lesser extent are great examples of that, where it's like, look, we sought to know nothing but Christ crucified among you. And now, this is how you should be acting. You should take great care in your life. You should be acting in love. You should be following those 10 commandments and loving your neighbor as the Lord has instructed. Romans does something similar. In fact, honestly, all the letters, really, when you get right down to it. Even the shorter letters from John and Peter. Peter's letter is kind of instruction on how to live a life under persecution. Where he's, look, if you suffer, make sure you're suffering for good. I am for doing good. Don't go suffer for evil. I mean, what's that? Everybody suffers for doing evil. There's nothing about that.
I mean, there's nothing.
Just don't.
I mean, kind of. There's nothing worthy of that. Obviously, right? He did evil. I mean, like
anybody can do that, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing special about that. We all are capable of doing that.
It's like, so he's like, do what is right, even if you should suffer.
Because that's what's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is it better that you should suffer for doing good if that is God's will than to suffer for doing evil? And I feel also the people who are saying, well, all I have to do is ask for forgiveness. Well, how about right now? Right now. Now's a good time.
And turn your life around, too.
Because I was thinking with all those warnings about, like the James and faith and works and whatnot, that, when you keep going on and sinning, at some point, you're going to reject the faith. I mean, you're rejecting what God says all over the place. I mean.
Yeah, and that's a classic case of people forgetting that freedom doesn't mean the ability to do anything and everything. Freedom means the ability to do what is good and right.
And there's so much good and right that you can do that, it's kind of nice, actually, that God lets us, have a say in what we do.
Well, to use bad grammar, you said, people are saying gotta have evil to make, good worthwhile. And it's like, have choices. And it's like, no, I can think of good choices. Good, gooder, goodest. There's three choices.
That is definitely how I've come to think of it. Right. Free will is about choosing which good to do, not about if you do good,
right.
Which good.
Yeah, picking which good. All right, we're going to move on now, because I don't want to get too bogged down on that one. I think I've managed to make the points I was wanting to make with that passage. So we're going to do 23 and 25, through 25, excuse me.
All right. And after all your wickedness, woe to you, declares the Lord God. You built yourself a vaulted chamber and made yourself a lofty place in every square. At the head of every street you built your lofty place and made your beauty an abomination, offering yourself to any passerby and multiplying your hoarding.
All right, so just to top it all off, they didn't bother hiding. They built grand palaces to their sin.
Shout your abortion.
Yeah, shout your abortion, or TikTok your abortion now.
And the various people giving all those interviews to explain, exactly their, all the ways they're breaking sexual morality that they're announcing to the whole world, so we can all know these things.
Yeah. Melt your purity ring and create a statue to female genitalia.
All that crap is nothing but just shocking on people and putting it out there to see, how they can shock you or just to get a response or something.
Some are the thing, but it's weird. I mean, it is weird that I don't know. I kind of feel like back in the 80s when you're shock rockers and whatnot, right? Shock the normies and whatnot. Because look at us being bad and enjoying it. But now it seems like we're shocking the normies by this is good. I know you think it isn't, but it is. I know the difference between look at me enjoying being evil and look at me saying my evil is good. I understand it's not too far to go from point A to point B, but
yeah,
probably less far than we thought it was. But
well, they figure if they put it out there enough, people will start to believe it.
Right, and even if you don't necessarily come to believe it, it becomes normal. I know they point out, with parenting, that even if your kid doesn't drink, if they hang out with people who do drink, drinking is normal. For them. So it's kind of the same way that even if, you are not engaging in all the various, sexual immorality that is out there, it's normal. And you've got friends who do it. It just, and when things are normal, then they're not, you miss how bad they are.
Yeah, that's very true. Of course, I'm sitting here realizing just how low my notes are.
Oh,
think celebrity Twitter feeds.
Well, celebrity Twitter feeds still exist.
Well, they do, but they've moved on with TikToks and all that kind of stuff. I
I was just thinking of all the interviews that have been about polyamory and whatnot recently, and consensual non-monogamy and all that good stuff.
Yeah. And here they laughed at us when we said, this is going to be the fallout of Obergefell.
The fallout of what?
Obergefell, that's the Supreme Court ruling that legitimized same-sex marriages across the country. They kept telling us that's a slippery slope as a fallacy, but they keep proving me right, so I can't really call it a fallacy. But anyhow, so we got that. They're just not hiding it. And they're advertising.
Well, it's all over. Any TV show or movie you watch now, you've got same-sex couples and everything. And all that is for the little kids growing up watching it and stuff. They think it's normal.
Well, it's for everybody. It's meant to normalize it for everybody.
Well, I know. It's a little harder in my generation to consider it normal.
Well, I think they're putting in the Disney movies and whatnot.
Right.
And I know that they put it in a kid's book that my daughter was reading, because when I was reading it aloud to her when that came up, I was telling her we don't believe in that, and she said, I just thought it was a misprint.
Because I've had those little baby boys telling me that they've been told that it's okay for men to marry men and women to marry men. I said, no, it's not. Whoever's telling you that is not telling you the truth.
That's right. Already, right at the beginning of public schooling,
Well, not just public schooling, it's everywhere.
It's probably
maybe not in a Christian home that's homeschooling, but
Well, it is in a lot of places, right? Because the dominant, culture of the day is right. It's good, so we need everybody to acknowledge it.
We've got to accept everybody for who they are. Mm-hmm. That's how they spoon feed it. Yeah. They are who they are, and we just have to accept them. We don't judge.
Except when you're racist, then we judge.
Yeah. Anyhow, the picture that this is kind of painting makes me think of the entire world now is like Las Vegas or Atlantic City or
oh my gosh, right?
Or is it Mumbai? What's the name of it? It's the big city over in
Dubai.
What? Dubai. That's it, Dubai. Where it's just like this giant carnival of sin.
I didn't think Dubai necessarily deserves it quite as much as Vegas does, but more than the very conservative Muslim government puts up with otherwise.
Well, it's like Moses coming down with the tablets and sending everybody, just those few short days.
Partying around
and it's like today it's on steroids.
Yeah. But what this is a reference to, though, is the idea of the high places, the hills and the mountains, being the places of worship for these idols. So that's mostly what it's referencing, but at the same time, I can't help but think that they turned the world into Vegas, or they turn, I guess we could also go. They turned the world into Bourbon Street.
There you go. Yeah.
Where it's not just in the fancy buildings; it's right there on the street.
Yeah.
And the like. So, and you proposition everybody. They saw they saw a foreign god, and they're like, "Well, come on in." Yeah. So,
honestly, when I was reading some of the history of religion in the U.S. in the mid-20th century of this religious book author, at some level, the course of his career was ever more widening the outside religions he was inviting in to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's go to 26 through 29.
You also plagued the whore with the Egyptians, your lustful neighbors, multiplying your whoring to provoke me to anger. Behold, therefore I stretched out my hand against you and diminished your allotted portion and delivered you to the greed of your enemies, the daughters of the Philistines, who were ashamed of your lewd behavior. You plagued the whore also with Assyrians, because you were not satisfied. Yes, you plagued the whore with them, and still you were not satisfied. You multiplied your whoring also with the trading land of Chaldea,
Chaldea.
and even with this you were not satisfied.
All right.
Well, the more you do, the more you want it, it becomes not enough. It's got
Yeah,
more and more.
It's never enough.
Right.
And with the Egyptians, that was a particularly egregious. That's why it tends to get it's put here first, because that was the land that was associated with bondage to slavery. And so that they're turning back to this place that bound them.
Mm-hmm.
In some regards, you could consider this like the person who is returning to their abusive boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife. And
They never got that lesson. Don't do repeats.
yeah. And just to top it all off, he goes, "Look, you are so bad, the Philistines were ashamed of you." And given the animosity between the Philistines and the Israelites, that's like a super insult. It's like, dude, even the Philistines were ashamed by your behavior. And you know how bad the Philistines are.
Honestly, it's probably like today if you could say with some degree of justice that, boy, even the Nazis didn't sink that low.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I know a few who would go, well, that's because the Nazis didn't go far enough.
Thus learning the wrong lesson from that.
Yep. And what he lists here are the groups that the Judeans were turning to protect them from somebody else. So they were turning, in this particular time, they had turned to the Egyptians to protect them from Babylon. And that didn't go well. And they had turned to the Egyptians earlier to protect them from the Assyrians.
In general, when Egypt's perspective of men, sure, we'll help you out, and oh look, now you can be part of our little empire. It's so great.
And they intermixed with Assyria, taking on their gods. And then they did the same thing with the Philistines too. And so they just turned from one to the next, to the next, to the next, seeking protection, basically. Seeking security. And that is an illustration of idolatry. We keep turning from one God to the next, seeking that sense of security. From the God of Mammon, we seek security from him, but when he fails, we turn to the God of power, and when he fails, we turn to the God of Eros.
Good health.
Yeah, the God of health. And just keep going round and round and round in circles. And none of them are going to satisfy.
Probably.
Because they can't.
Which is why they end up going around in circles.
Yeah.
And the inevitable disappointment.
So you have this loop that people go through. And the only thing that's going to break it is the law. And the law coming down like a hammer, with people reaching their proverbial rock bottom. In this case, we have God forcing the rock bottom as he's acting in judgment. And he's just ripping down all the supports. He's withdrawing his hand of protection. He's withdrawing his benefits, the gifts of food and water and all that. He's pulling it back so that they will experience his judgment. And I have seen some similar comparisons to today, where with what we're seeing in the world around us, we're seeing God withdrawing his hand again. And this proliferation of evil around us is a sign that he's judging us. And I don't mean just us, the U.S., by the way. I mean the world over. And, that's kind of a scary thought.
Especially, I was thinking with rock bottom, and the thing that's kind of always, you think once you hit rock bottom, there's no way but up. But, there could be a lot of rock bottoms. If you thought you hit the rock bottom, oh, look, this guy failed me.
Use a drill and drill through
Yeah, sometimes, right, sometimes, then you drill right through it because, okay, God brought you to this point. And you're like, yeah, but I'm turning to something other than God. And you're drilling right through the hole. So now you can hit a new rock bottom. But nope, not going to seek God this time. I'm still going to seek something else and keep digging that hole.
And eventually that rock bottom is a grave.
But honestly, I think a lot of the narratives about addiction and whatnot, you feel like, all right, you hit rock bottom, there's no way to go but up. And unfortunately, that is not the case.
Nope.
No, because some of them will go up a little bit and then
Because you can just keep digging.
Yep. And we shouldn't be following the advice of Dory here and just keep digging.
Right? No, just keep digging. Just keep
Finding Nemo, where Dory starts encouraging Marlin with just keep swimming, just keep.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't just keep digging. Recognize the message that God is trying to drive home.
And sometimes you're digging, but sometimes you thought, well, this is right. We were running off of after something else. That this will be it this time. I mean, I know there's a blogger that I was reading that was turned out to be like that with religions, because he used to be actually a Greek pagan, a Reconstructionist Greek pagan. Not too many of those out there. Then he converted to Catholicism, and he thought this is it this time. I found real, but unfortunately, after about a decade, then he went to go find something else, and that was really sad. And dragging his daughter right behind him.
Yep. Yeah, and he several times I was like, how quick you were to forget, and which is really sad, because God was continually sending prophets telling them, don't trust in the might of men, don't trust in the strength of armies. Don't trust in the material goods. Don't trust in these things. And remember the God of your fathers who brought them out of the land of Egypt. He wasn't keeping quiet. He was telling them these things. And they kept forgetting. They kept ignoring. They kept turning aside.
I was thinking at least one point there was all the king's advisors were like, that is stupid talk, okay? God is all well and good, but you know what's better? Actual armies. Let's go get some actual armies. How about that? And I feel like that same sort of thing today, like prayer, it's all well and good, but how about do actual things?
Yeah. Very similar. Kind of goes back to our discussion about a year or so ago when we were talking about the one psalm where he's going, you tell me to fly to the hills, but they're waiting as a hunter with snares, and so they'll catch me if I fly. And that's what's going on here. Yeah, partly.
Well, I think they got to the point, unfortunately, here, where instead of God saying, turn to me and I will deliver you, and they're ignoring that, we got to the point where God is saying, no, I will not deliver you from this.
Yeah.
And then they're like, yes, but now we're ready to listen, God. Like how about deliverance? That would be so great.
So we can move it in. We can start over again.
I think Jeremiah in this case was right. Everybody hated him because he's the one saying, God will not save you. They're like, oh, that's Christmas talk.
Yep. And we see the same thing again today. You have people don't mind preachers preaching against sin until it's about their sin. And then they're going to turn to the person who's going to tell them everything's okay.
It kind of depends. Because sometimes, they're right. God, the law hits, and people do repent.
I realize that, but
in general, like the sins you already knew were sins, and the sins that you don't feel like are your problem.
But
sins of the world,
my chief illustration is going to be the same-sex relationships. They're really where we in particular we saw this amongst celebrity pastors, which is kind of a microcosm.
It is harder to say speak against sins the world doesn't think are sins.
And as soon as a daughter or a son or other close relationship got involved in a same-sex relationship, all of a sudden they stopped condemning it. And started affirming it.
I see that in my own family.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the number one reason, right?
And each will say, well, I went on a spiritual journey. And they found the people who were going to confirm what they were thinking.
There's plenty of them out there.
And
especially sometimes there's a lot in the church where, like, we adopted a lot of the world's thinking right up to, like, okay, we don't think same-sex marriage is right, but all the reasons the world says it's right, well, we agreed with all that. So, I mean, it doesn't take very much. You're already 3/4 thinking like the world anyway.
I just ain't understood how anybody can think it's right. God did not create man for man, nor did he create woman for woman. He created
and
this is one of those things that I miss. I think God, he took me in the direction he took me. Because when I started questioning things about what actually is a correct way of thinking, instead of driving me into my contemporaries, I was driven into older writers. So I started reading some of the church fathers. I started reading some of the 16th century, early 17th century Lutheran theologians and the like. And so when I started questioning things, I went to people who didn't share my assumptions for the most part. And so I started really questioning a lot of the assumptions of today, and I found answers from people who didn't hold my assumptions from today. The problem is we get a lot of people right now they question the assumptions of today, but they go to the people who hold the assumptions of today and confirm the assumptions of today.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons not to go to the past, and sometimes I wonder how much of it is as they say, the past is a different place, they do things differently there, that it's difficult. Like, right, like you read it and you're like, oh, that's hard. Not even that it makes you mad, it's just hard because it's a different way of thinking and doing.
This is just really quick. Tom Holland had an excellent point in his critique of the interview with Putin. Tom Holland, by the way, is a very well-recognized historian and has done a lot of good history work with the church. No, he's not the same Tom Holland who played Spider-Man in the MCU movies. But he made a point that I've made about some other folks. The problem that he had with his going back in with his history account is he was reading the assumptions of today into his history. And that is one of the things you can't do when you read older writers. You cannot take the assumptions of today and read them into them because they didn't have them. They're operating with the assumptions that came before them. So you have to go further back to find out what those assumptions are to be able to understand them. You can't go from the assumptions of today and think you can understand them. Because all you're going to do is just read them as a person today. Just confirm and not actually get what they were saying.
It took me on my second go through the Book of Concord before I could quit doing that. I knew I was doing it, but I couldn't stop because I didn't have any other options to do. I'm like, I know this is not the case, but I don't know what is. And it took me my second go through before I had an alternate way of looking at it.
And I will say, some of my background was a big help for this. I was taught research. Because I think that's what I did as a grad student. And one of the things that you did with research is you followed the bibliography back. And so when you see them citing things, when you see them talking about other things, you go back to those and you start reading those sources. So yeah, you want to talk. People talk about going down the rabbit hole on YouTube. Oh boy, you can do that when you're doing research because you can really go down the rabbit hole and work your way back fast. But anyhow, we're officially way over time. I got to go get ready to do a service. So we're going to go ahead and close up. Let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.